Most schools teach you how to earn money but never how money actually works. What if I told you inflation eats your savings, banks use your deposits to make billions, and debt can make you rich if used right? Today we uncover 10 surprising facts about money that schools don't teach you. Before we begin, hit subscribe to join MindSpark Facts, where curiosity sparks intelligence. Tap the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another mind-blowing fact video. Now let's begin. The invisible thief called inflation. Money feels safe when it sits still. That's what most students grow up believing. Save your cash, avoid risk, and you'll be financially secure. But the world runs on a silent system that punishes money for not moving. That silent system is inflation, the gradual increase in the price of goods and services over time. It doesn't announce itself like taxes or school fees. It doesn't send warnings like a failed exam. It just slowly drains purchasing power until you realize your money can't buy what it used to. Let's break it down with a real example. In Nigeria, a loaf of bread that cost 300 Nigerian nairas in 2015 climbed to over 800 Nigerian nairas by 2025 in many areas. That's inflation at work. It means that even though your cash number stays the same, its value shrinks. If you saved 10,000 Nigerian nairas under your mattress in 2015, expecting it to secure your future, you would have discovered that by 2025, that same 10,000 Nigerian nairas buys less than half of what it once could. Schools teach arithmetic, but they don't teach economic erosion. Inflation isn't just a local problem, it's global. In the United States, $1 in 1970 had the buying power of about $7 today. That means if you saved $100 in 1970 without investing it, you effectively lost $600 worth of purchasing power. This is why the wealthy don't just save money, they park money in assets that grow faster than inflation: stocks, real estate, gold, or businesses. They understand that inflation is an invisible tax on the uninvested. Inflation also hits savings accounts harder than students are told. Most banks offer savings interest rates far below the inflation rate. For example, if inflation is 20% in a year but your savings account grows by only 5%, you didn't make 5% profit. You actually lost 15% in real value. That means your money worked all year just to come back weaker. No exam board teaches this. The real shock is this: inflation rewards borrowers and punishes savers. Why? Because if you borrow 1 million Nigerian nairas today and inflation rises aggressively, you pay back the same 1 million Nigerian nairas later, but with money that's worth less than when you borrowed it. This is why countries, corporations, and billionaires are constantly comfortable with debt. They know inflation will shrink the burden of repayment over time. Meanwhile, savers who avoid debt and risk are left confused when their discipline doesn't translate to wealth. Inflation also affects wages. Salaries rise slower than living costs. A teacher earning 50,000 Nigerian nairas monthly in 2010 might have received a raise to 120,000 Nigerian nairas by 2025, but if living costs tripled or quadrupled, the raise wasn't a reward, it was a delayed survival adjustment. This is why many working adults feel like they're running on a treadmill despite doing everything right. Schools teach punctuality but not purchasing power timelines. Central banks influence inflation through money printing. When governments print more money than the economy produces in goods, more cash chases the same products, driving prices up. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries printed trillions in stimulus funds. The result? A global surge in inflation from 2021 to 2024. Students were taught history while living inside an inflationary case study they never understood. Inflation also changes investment psychology. It pushes smart investors toward long-term thinking. The wealthy calculate inflation-adjusted returns, not just nominal profits. They ask, is my investment growing faster than inflation, or am I getting poorer while feeling richer? This mindset alone separates average earners from financial architects. The biggest tragedy is that inflation doesn't steal equally. The rich hedge early. The middle class hedges late. The poor can't hedge at all. When inflation spikes, asset owners raise prices and rents, increasing income. Non-owners absorb the shock. This is why the wealth gap widens most aggressively during inflationary periods. If schools taught inflation, students wouldn't fear investing early. They'd fear not investing at all. They'd understand that saving is step one, but growing is the real goal. Inflation isn't just rising prices, it's the financial villain schools forgot to include in the syllabus. Banks don't just store your money, they use it to make more. Most students grow up seeing banks as digital piggy banks, safe vaults built to protect your deposits. But the reality is more fascinating, more strategic, and far more profitable for the banks than schools ever explain. When you deposit money into a bank, the bank doesn't simply lock it away. It becomes part of a system called fractional reserve banking, where only a small percentage of your deposit is kept in reserve, and the rest is lent out or invested to generate income. In the United States, banks are required to hold only a fraction of deposits as reserves. This ratio is set by the Federal Reserve. The rest is used to issue loans, mortgages, business financing, car loans, student loans, and credit lines. For example, when you deposit $1,000, the bank might hold a small portion in reserve and lend out the rest. That loaned money often ends up being deposited into another bank, which then lends its own fraction of that deposit again. This creates a money multiplication effect, where the banking system expands the money supply far beyond the original deposit. This system is one of the reasons banks grow into financial giants. In Canada, major banks like RBC, TD, and Scotiabank report billions in annual profits, much of it generated from interest earned on loans issued using depositors' money. Canadians are taught how to open bank accounts, but rarely taught what happens after the money is deposited. Let's make this more real. In 2024, student loan debt in the USA exceeded $1.7 trillion. Every dollar loaned came from a banking system that uses deposits to fuel lending. Banks collect interest on those loans, often at rates far higher than what they pay depositors in savings interest. So while a student earns maybe 1 to 3% annually on savings, banks might earn 6 to 9% or more on loans built from those same deposits. The gap? That's part of the bank's profit engine. Now compare that with African countries. In Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya, banks also lend from deposits, but inflation adds another twist. If inflation is high, loan interest rates also rise, making lending even more profitable for banks. In Kenya, mobile banking platforms like M-Pesa have turned everyday deposits into a financial ecosystem where money circulates constantly, generating fees and credit products. In South Africa, banks earn massively from home loans, similar to mortgage lending in the USA and Canada. In the USA and Canada, mortgages are one of the biggest bank profit drivers. When someone takes a 30-year mortgage in the USA or a 25-year mortgage in Canada, they often repay almost double or more the original house price over time due to interest. A homebuyer might think they're just paying for a house, but they're also paying decades of interest to banks whose lending power was fueled by depositors who never learned this system in school. Banks also invest depositor money into government bonds. In the USA, banks frequently buy treasury bonds, earning guaranteed interest. In Canada, banks buy Canadian government securities too. These bonds are low-risk, interest-generating instruments that quietly grow bank revenue year after year. Another surprising detail: banks love predictable borrowers. Students and families taking education loans, car financing, or housing loans create stable long-term revenue streams. Banks don't just lend, they structure lending in ways that lock borrowers into decades of repayment, ensuring profit continuity. Schools teach students to save money. But they don't teach that once saved, the bank uses it to create credit products, interest income, and investment portfolios that make banks richer than the saver ever becomes from saving alone. This is why financially educated people view banks not as storage facilities, but as leverage institutions. They save in banks for safety but invest outside banks for growth. The smartest young adults eventually learn this. Your money doesn't sleep at the bank, it works night shifts for the bank. The wealthy understand this early, which is why they don't just deposit. They borrow strategically, invest borrowed capital, and let inflation and asset growth work in their favor while the bank earns interest from the financially unaware. Debt isn't just a trap, it's a tool if you know the rules. To most students, the word debt sounds like danger, something to avoid at all costs. Schools warn about owing money the same way they warn about failing finals. Don't go near it. But the real world operates on a different syllabus. In finance, debt has two personalities, one that destroys the uninformed and one that builds the wealthy. The difference isn't the debt itself, it's the strategy behind it. In the United States, household debt sits above $17 trillion, but within that massive number lies a secret most schools never unpack. Not all debt is equal. There's consumer debt, credit cards, shopping loans, car payments, and there's productive debt, used to buy or build things that grow in value or generate income. The financially educated don't just borrow, they borrow with a plan that makes the borrowed money earn more than it costs. Take Canada as another example. The average Canadian carries mortgage debt, but many wealthy Canadians intentionally use loans to invest in rental properties. They borrow from banks, purchase real estate, rent it out, and let tenants effectively cover the loan repayments. Over time, the property increases in value while the loan amount stays fixed. That means inflation and market growth quietly reduce the weight of the debt while increasing the value of what was purchased with it. This strategy is common in many places, including Africa. In Kenya, small business owners use microloans to grow shops and farms. In South Africa, entrepreneurs often use credit to expand logistics companies, real estate portfolios, and retail chains. In Nigeria, despite challenges like higher interest rates and inflation, the same principle applies. Debt used to create income can outperform debt used for consumption. For example, a business loan used to scale a service company or invest in property can grow wealth faster than saving alone ever could. The USA housing market shows the same pattern. Someone who bought a home using a mortgage in 1995 might still owe money on it, but the home's value has often increased by 200 to 400% depending on location. Meanwhile, the loan balance didn't grow at that rate, the asset did. That's why many millionaires don't fear mortgages. They understand that the right debt buys time, assets, and opportunity. But here's the twist schools never highlight. Debt punishes directionless borrowers. In the USA, credit card interest rates often exceed 20 to 30% annually. That means buying things you don't need on credit can snowball into long-term financial stress. In Canada, payday loan interest can exceed 300% APR. In parts of Africa, informal lending markets can trap borrowers with extreme repayment conditions too. These forms of debt don't build wealth, they extract it. Meanwhile, the wealthy use a different class of debt: low-interest, long-term asset-backed loans. They borrow slowly, grow assets quickly, and let the gap work in their favor. They also refinance, restructuring old loans into new ones with better terms, extending time while assets keep growing. In 2023, a 25-year-old investor in the USA who took a loan to buy an apartment and rented it out could have earned rental income while also benefiting from market appreciation. Meanwhile, another 25-year-old who avoided debt entirely but kept savings in a low-interest bank account likely earned less than inflation took. One used debt as leverage. The other used savings as a pause button. The results look nothing alike. The biggest lesson here is this: debt isn't the villain. Ignorance is. Borrowing without purpose is a trap. Borrowing with strategy is a ladder. The world's biggest companies, real estate empires, and investment portfolios in both North America and Africa were built not by avoiding debt, but by deploying debt with precision. If schools taught this, students wouldn't ask, "Should I borrow?" They'd ask the smarter question, "What will I build with what I borrow?" The rich don't work for money, money works for them. One of the biggest money lessons missing from school is the concept of capital efficiency. The idea that wealth is not built primarily by exchanging time for money, but by building systems where money grows on its own. The average person is trained to think, work harder, earn more, save more. But the wealthy think differently: invest earlier, earn smarter, let compounding do the heavy lifting. In the United States, the richest 1% own more than 50% of all stocks. That means while most people are busy working for paychecks, the wealthy are collecting returns from company profits, dividends, and long-term market growth. If a student invested just $50 a month into the S&P 500 starting at age 18, by age 60 they could accumulate over $300,000 plus, assuming average historical market returns of 7–10% annually adjusted for inflation. Schools teach interest formulas, but they don't teach index investing behavior. Now look at Canada. The average financially informed Canadian investor uses TFSA, tax-free savings account, or RRSP, registered retirement savings plan, not as savings vaults, but as investment containers for stocks and ETFs. A 20-year-old Canadian who invested $6,000 annually into a TFSA with average 8% growth could reach $1 million plus by retirement without ever earning a massive salary. That's the power of letting money work for you in a structured way. Compare this with parts of Africa. In Kenya, investors buy farmland not to work the land themselves, but to lease it out or flip it when value increases. In Ghana, young entrepreneurs invest profits into rental properties to earn monthly passive income. In South Africa, financially educated families buy REITs, real estate investment trusts, so they can earn from real estate without owning physical buildings. And in Nigeria, those who eventually build wealth often move from saving culture into asset culture. Buying land, starting side businesses, investing in treasury bills, or partnering in scalable ventures. Here's the mindset shift. Money grows when it's deployed, not when it's parked. Most teenagers are never told that the wealthy use three main engines. Ownership, they own parts of businesses, stocks, equity, partnerships. Leverage, they use borrowed money to scale assets instead of draining personal cash. Compounding, they start early and let time multiply their gains. This is why many young adults in the USA and Canada eventually learn that billionaires don't earn wages. They own companies. They don't save aggressively, they invest aggressively. They don't avoid loans, they structure loans around assets. They don't think in months, they think in decades. Another example, Warren Buffett made more than 99% of his wealth after age 50, not because he suddenly started working harder, but because his investments had decades to compound. That means even the most disciplined saver who never invests can't outperform someone who invests early, even in small amounts. In 2024, Nvidia stock returned over 150% plus in 1 year. Apple, Microsoft, and Google generated trillions in market value. Investors who own small fractions of these companies earned more in a year than many workers earned in 5. That's wealth without clock-in hours. Schools don't teach students that financial freedom is mathematical, not emotional. It's less about being fearless and more about being structured. It's less about earning more and more about owning more. It's less about avoiding risk and more about distributing risk intelligently. The real shock is this: while the average person says, "I want more money," the wealthy say, "I want more assets that make more money." And that one sentence explains the whole wealth gap. Your credit score is a financial reputation card you never knew you had. There's a parallel universe running beside money itself, one made of numbers you can't withdraw, can't touch, but can't escape. In North America, especially in the USA and Canada, this universe is ruled by a 3-digit financial identity known as your credit score. Most teens finish school without even hearing the term, yet this number controls interest rates, loan approvals, housing opportunities, insurance costs, and sometimes even job background checks. A credit score is a system that predicts how reliable you are with borrowed money. In the United States, scores typically range from 300 to 850, with 700 plus considered good, 750 plus excellent. In Canada, the range is similar, and the agencies, Equifax and TransUnion, track almost the same behaviors. If you have a high score, banks treat you like VIP. If you have a low score, even basic loans become expensive or impossible. Let's bring in real examples. In the USA, a person with a score of 750 may get mortgage interest around 3 to 4%, while someone with 580 could pay 7–10% plus. Over 30 years, that difference can cost the low-score borrower tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars extra on the exact same house. In Canada, car insurance companies sometimes use credit scores to determine premiums. A financially responsible person might pay far less for insurance than someone financially chaotic, even if they drive the same car and have the same driving record. Schools teach you to protect your social reputation, but not your financial reputation. Now here's the surprising twist: a credit score doesn't measure wealth. It measures behavior. You can be broke and still have a strong score if you pay on time, keep credit usage low, and manage accounts responsibly. Meanwhile, someone earning a high salary but misusing credit cards can have a terrible score. It's not about income, it's about discipline, structure, and timing. One of the biggest factors is called credit utilization, how much of your available credit you actually use. In the USA and Canada, using more than 30% of your credit limit can drop your score fast. So if your credit card limit is $1,000 and you constantly spend $900, your score gets punished even if you repay it. The system prefers borrowers who borrow lightly but pay consistently. Another factor is payment history, the king of credit score components. Even a single late payment can hurt your score for years. This is why financially literate people automate payments, not because they're forgetful, but because punctuality is profitable. Let's zoom out to Africa for contrast. Many African countries don't have credit score systems as universally embedded into everyday life as North America, but a version of it is emerging. Nigeria has credit bureaus like CRC Credit Bureau and First Central, but the culture around credit scoring is still developing compared to the USA/Canada. Kenya uses CRB, Credit Reference Bureau, especially tied to mobile lending apps like Tala and Branch. South Africa has one of the most structured credit ecosystems on the continent, where credit scores significantly influence lending decisions. Africa is learning the system. North America is run by it. Here's the educational shocker: banks don't lend more money to people who need it. They lend more money to people who have proven they don't abuse it. A high credit score gives you access to cheaper capital, and cheaper capital gives you access to assets, and assets grow into wealth. It's a cycle most students never get shown. The wealthy don't see credit scores as random evaluations, they see them as interest rate discount cards. The higher your score, the less interest you pay, the more money you keep, the more leverage you access, the faster you build assets. So while students graduate chasing money, the financially educated graduate chasing trust signals that unlock money. Because in the real financial world, your reputation isn't built by what you say, it's built by what you repay. Cash is not king, ownership is. For decades, motivational speakers repeated the phrase, cash is king. It sounded wise, strong, and final, until you study how wealth is actually created. In reality, cash is more like a raw material, not the finished product. What truly rules the financial world is ownership, owning something that produces value, income, or appreciation over time. In the United States, over 90% of millionaires built their wealth not from saving piles of cash, but from owning assets, especially stocks, businesses, and real estate. If cash were king, the biggest bank account holders would automatically be the richest. But instead, the richest are the ones who own companies, intellectual property, land, portfolios, and systems that generate recurring revenue. Let's explore the stock market first. When you buy shares of a company, you become a partial owner of that business. You now earn when the business grows. In 2024, companies like Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google, Alphabet, and Meta generated hundreds of billions in profit. Investors who owned even 0.0001% of these companies earned more than many workers did from full-time salaries. That's the power of earning without exchanging hours. In Canada, the same formula applies. Investors pour money into ETFs like Vanguard FTSE Canada All Cap iShares Core S&P/TSX, or S&P 500 ETFs because they know a secret. The fastest way to build wealth is to own a slice of an entire economy, not just earn inside it. Many Canadians who max out their TFSA or RSP don't fill it with idle cash, they fill it with ownership vehicles. Now let's move to real estate. In the USA, a person who bought a home in 2000 at $150,000 might see it valued at $350,000 to $500,000 plus today depending on location. In Canada, that jump is even more dramatic. A house purchased in Toronto or Vancouver for 200,000 Canadian dollars in 2000 could exceed 1 million Canadian dollars plus in 2025. The homeowners didn't become rich because they held cash, they became rich because they held property. Schools don't teach students that rent is someone else getting paid while you build zero ownership. Let's compare with Africa. In Nigeria, land that sold for 500,000 Nigerian nairas per plot in 2010 now sells for 5 million Nigerian nairas plus in many urban areas. In Ghana, coastal properties appreciated aggressively due to tourism and urban expansion. In Kenya, farmland near Nairobi multiplied in value as infrastructure expanded. In South Africa, property and REIT owners earn monthly distributions while benefiting from appreciation. Different economies, same lesson. Owners earn infinitely more than savers. Now let's hit a myth head-on. Many people believe you need to be rich before you invest. The truth is the opposite. You invest to eventually become rich. Ownership creates three major wealth outcomes. Appreciation, the value increases over time. Income, it pays you regularly, rent, dividends, profits. Leverage potential, owners can borrow against what they own. This is why banks easily lend to landlords, shareholders, and business owners. They have collateral. If you own nothing, you are considered financially invisible. If you own something, you are financially bankable. The financially educated treat cash like seeds, not trophies. You don't celebrate seeds in your hand, you plant them. Because a seed that stays in your palm forever feeds nobody. A seed that's planted feeds generations. The real kings of money are not people with cash. They are people with claim, legal claim, equity claim, asset claim, profit claim. That is the real crown. Not cash. Ownership. The government can create money, but you can't. Most students think money is created by working, trading, or business activity. In reality, only one institution has the legal authority to create new money out of thin air: the central bank of a country. Individuals and commercial businesses can earn money, move money, multiply money, or lose money, but they cannot legally create money. That power belongs to governments through their monetary systems. In the United States, the Federal Reserve controls the printing and digital creation of the US dollar. In Canada, it's the Bank of Canada. Across Africa, It's institutions like the Central Bank of Nigeria, the South African Reserve Bank, the Bank of Ghana, or the Central Bank of Kenya. Whether the currency is USD, CAD, NGN, GHS, ZAR, or KS, the principle is identical. Money creation is centralized and regulated. Now here's the twist most people never learn in school. Money today is mostly digital, not physical. In the USA, less than 10% of the total money supply exists as paper cash. The rest is created electronically, numbers typed into existence by the Federal Reserve when needed, especially during economic interventions. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. monetary system introduced trillions of new dollars into circulation through stimulus packages, emergency lending facilities, and asset purchases. That wasn't forklifts carrying printed paper into banks, it was digital currency creation. Canada followed a similar path. The Bank of Canada expanded the money supply to support economic stability, purchasing government bonds and enabling liquidity programs. Many African countries did the same, but with different scales and outcomes. In Nigeria, digital currency creation also increased to fund economic support systems, which later contributed to inflationary pressure. In Ghana, money supply expansion during economic stress influenced currency depreciation. In South Africa and Kenya, liquidity injections helped stabilize banking systems and credit markets. Different continents, different pressures, but the same machine behind the scenes. This leads to a powerful realization. Governments can create money, but they can't create value. And when more money exists than value in circulation, prices rise. This is one of the main drivers of inflation, currency weakening, and purchasing power shifts. Now here's what schools really fail to explain. Since you can't create money, the smartest path is to position yourself close to where new money flows first. The wealthy don't print money themselves. They do something smarter, they own the assets and institutions that receive new money early. When central banks create money, it often enters the economy through commercial banks, via lending or liquidity facilities. Financial markets, via bond or asset purchases. Corporations, via credit expansion and investment funding. Real estate as mortgage lending increases. So if you own stocks, property or business equity, you often benefit when new money increases asset prices. But if you hold only cash or depend only on wages, you receive the impact last, after prices have already adjusted upward. Example. In 2020 to 2024, while money supply expanded in the USA, asset markets surged. Companies like Tesla, Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, and Meta gained trillions in valuation. Investors who owned shares watched their wealth multiply without printing a single dollar themselves. Meanwhile, people holding only cash saw prices of groceries, fuel, and rent climb faster than their bank interest could keep up. This is why the financial world has two types of people. Value creators and asset owners who benefit from money expansion. Wage earners and cash holders who absorb the shock of it. So while students were memorizing economic theories, the wealthy were positioning themselves to receive money before it trickled down. They understand that money creation isn't their job. Money capture is. And that is the lesson schools never put on the board. The psychology of money matters more than the math. Schools teach formulas, percentages, equations, and logic. But money doesn't move on logic alone. It moves on human behavior, emotion, confidence, fear, status, impulse, and belief systems. The world's biggest financial outcomes are driven not just by spreadsheets, but by the psychology of the people making the decisions. In the United States and Canada, consumer spending is a perfect example. In 2024, Americans spent over $19 trillion on goods and services. Canada recorded hundreds of billions in retail and credit-based purchases. But here's the surprising truth. A massive percentage of that spending wasn't driven by necessity, it was driven by emotion. People don't just buy products, they buy identity. They don't just pay for services, they pay for comfort, validation, trend participation, and emotional reward. Take credit cards. Over 80% of American adults own at least one, and millions carry balances month to month, not because they can't do math, but because the psychology of buy now, worry later, is stronger than financial planning. In Canada, the average credit card debt per borrower is over 4,000 Canadian dollars plus, even in a country with strong financial infrastructure. These systems thrive because they understand human impulse better than schools teach self-control. Now let's look at investing psychology. A financially educated 19-year-old in Canada might invest early in ETFs through their TFSA. A financially uneducated 40-year-old in the USA might fear investing because they think it's gambling, even though mathematically, investing small amounts consistently into index funds historically outperforms savings. The math supports investing. But psychology decides participation. Another example, lotteries. In the USA, over $113 billion is spent annually on lottery tickets. In South Africa, the national lottery generates billions in revenue. In Nigeria, sports betting and lottery participation has exploded, especially among youth and adults. The odds are mathematically stacked against players. Yet people still play because psychology whispers louder than probability. Maybe I'll be the exception. Now compare that with how the wealthy think. The wealthy don't ask, "Can I afford this?" They ask, "Is this worth it, or is this feeding someone else's system?" They don't avoid risk, they avoid unrewarded risk. They don't chase excitement, they chase positioning. They don't spend to impress, they invest to compound silently, then let the results speak later. Let's talk about emotional biases that influence money decisions. Loss aversion. People fear losing $100 more than they hope to gain $200, so they avoid investing entirely. Herd mentality. When everyone buys a trend product, others follow even if it drains their finances. Instant gratification. Saving $500 feels boring. Spending $500 feels rewarding. The brain prefers reward now over reward later. Status signaling. People finance cars, gadgets, fashion, and lifestyles not for function but for perception. This is why many young adults in the USA and Canada finance luxury cars on 5 to 8 year loans while ignoring investing for retirement. The car depreciates. The debt doesn't. The psychology of appearance won over the psychology of future freedom. Here's the biggest psychological secret the wealthy master. Confidence controls cash flow. If you sound financially confident, banks lend to you. If you look financially structured, investors trust you. If you build a financial reputation, capital flows toward you. It's not manipulation, it's behavioral science. The math of money tells you how it can grow. The psychology of money tells you whether it will grow. And most people never get past the psychological gate even when the math is already solved. Taxes exist in layers and the wealthy legally navigate them. Most students learn that taxes are simply money you pay to the government. True but incomplete. The real world runs on tax layers, and the wealthy don't avoid taxes illegally, they learn how to optimize taxes legally through ownership, business structure, and financial planning. In the United States, individuals pay income tax, sales tax, property tax, capital gains tax, estate tax, and more. Canada has similar layers: federal and provincial income tax, Gulf Standard Time/Hawaii Standard Time on purchases, property tax, and capital gains tax on investments. Many African countries follow the same multi-layer model. Nigeria, PUI VAT property taxes, Kenya VAT PUI business taxes, South Africa income tax VAT capital gains, Ghana VAT income tax corporate tax. The systems look different but the architecture is the same. Taxes reward structure and punish ignorance. Here's a real example of tax layers in action. In the USA, when you earn $5,000 from a job, part is deducted as income tax before it reaches you. When you spend that $5,000 on goods, sales tax is added at checkout in many states. If you buy a home, you pay property tax annually. If you invest and sell for profit, capital gains tax applies. If you pass wealth down, estate taxes may apply depending on thresholds. That means the same $5,000 gets taxed multiple times as it moves through different financial identities. Now here's the twist schools never explain. Corporations don't get taxed like individuals. Investors don't get taxed like employees. In the USA, long-term capital gains tax from selling investments held over 1 year can be 0 to 20% depending on income bracket, often far lower than standard income tax rates which can exceed 30 to 37% at top tiers. In Canada, only 50% of capital gains are taxable, meaning if you make 100,000 Canadian dollars profit from an investment, only 50,000 Canadian dollars is subject to tax. That is a massive behavioral incentive to invest, not just earn wages. Meanwhile, a salaried worker pays 100% taxable income. An investor often pays partial taxable income at lower effective rates. A corporation pays taxes after expenses, payroll, operations, and deductions. This is why wealthy entrepreneurs and investors don't see taxes as a dead end, they see them as a terrain to understand. For example, a business owner earning $200,000 in the USA may deduct salaries, rent, equipment, marketing, logistics, software subscriptions, travel, insurance, and other legitimate business costs before tax is calculated. A student earning $5,000 has no deductions. Tax hits first, then life expenses hit after. Another example. In Canada, someone who invests through a TFSA pays zero tax on gains inside the account. That means if you invested in Amazon, Tesla, or Apple early and your portfolio grows inside a TFSA, you keep 100% of the profit. No tax. No penalty. No layers. Just compounding. This is one of the biggest legal wealth accelerators available to young Canadians and adults alike. Now compare that to Nigeria and parts of Africa. Even though inflation and interest rates can be higher, wealthy Africans still use the same principles. Owning land, structuring business expenses before tax, investing in government securities, building corporate entities, and treating money as deployable capital, not taxable salary alone. Schools teach tax compliance but not tax strategy. They teach civic duty but not financial geography. They teach honesty but not financial efficiency. They teach employment but not ownership behavior that changes your tax identity. Here's the summary in one powerful truth. Let's compare the three money paths. First, job income. Here you're taxed as an individual and taxes hit before expenses. This leads to slower wealth growth. Second, investing. Here you're seen as an investor. Your gains are often taxed at lower rates or partially taxable, helping you keep more capital. Third, business ownership. Here taxes are calculated after expenses and deductions, making it the most capital-efficient path. The real takeaway? Wealth grows fastest when your financial identity changes from employee to owner or investor. So while the average person works to earn money, then loses part of it in tax layers, the wealthy build structures that change how tax sees them, legally, strategically, and intelligently. Because the richest people are not the ones who pay the most tax. They are the ones who understand the rules of the tax game best. The secret power of early investing and compounding. If there is one lesson about money that schools almost never teach, it's this. Time is your most powerful financial tool. Not luck. Not a high-paying job. Not winning the lottery. Time combined with disciplined investing creates compounding, a snowball that can grow small amounts of money into fortunes over decades. In the United States, the principle of compounding is so powerful that it defines retirement success. For instance, a 20-year-old who invests just $200 a month into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund, with an average annual return of 8%, could accumulate over $500,000 by age 60. Wait, here's the catch. If the same person waits until age 30 to start the exact same plan, they'd end up with just over $250,000, half as much. 10 years makes a difference of $250,000. That's the invisible magic of compounding over time. In Canada, the concept is equally strong. Canadians who consistently invest in RRSPs or TFSAs with growth-oriented funds harness the power of tax-advantaged compounding. Even a modest annual investment of 5,000 Canadian dollars can surpass 1 million Canadian dollars over 40 years with disciplined reinvestment and market growth. The early investor doesn't just benefit from the dollar amount, they benefit from the time those dollars are allowed to multiply. Contrast that with typical financial behavior in many African countries. While Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa are rich in entrepreneurial energy, many young adults focus on short-term gain, saving cash, spending it, or using it for immediate consumption. But those who adopt early investing strategies such as putting funds into stocks, mutual funds, government bonds, or small businesses, witness compounding effects over decades. For example, a Nigerian investor who started with 50,000 Nigerian nairas in 2010 in an index fund yielding 10% annually could have turned it into over 600,000 Nigerian nairas by 2025, while the average bank savings account would barely keep pace with inflation. The psychology of early investing is also critical. Schools may teach students that earning more money is the path to wealth, but the truth is subtler. You don't need a massive salary to become rich. You need to start early, invest consistently, and let compounding do the work. The wealthy don't wait until they have enough money, they start with what they have even if it's small. Here's a universal example. USA, a teenager invests $50 per month starting at 18. By 60, that small habit grows into a six-figure portfolio. Canada, a young adult invests 100 Canadian dollars per month into a diversified ETF from age 20. By retirement, that becomes a powerful tax-free nest egg. Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana. Investing in low-risk government bonds or small business ventures early can yield multiples over 10 to 20 years compared to traditional savings accounts. Now let's discuss psychology and patience. Compounding rewards consistency, not speed. One of the reasons Americans, Canadians, and Africans fail to harness this power is impatience. Many expect instant returns or give up after a small loss. In reality, compounding thrives quietly, often unnoticed for years, until it suddenly becomes life-changing. Albert Einstein reportedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. He understood the secret that schools don't teach. If you let interest compound, it works harder than you ever could by labor alone. This is why billionaires in North America often started small, invested early, and never let fear stop them from allowing their capital to grow. Finally, early investing works even better when combined with the principles we've covered in previous chapters. Understanding inflation. Invest in assets that outpace inflation. Using debt strategically, borrow for appreciating assets, not liabilities. Leveraging banks and credit. Access cheap capital for investment while maintaining a strong credit score. Ownership. Choose investments that give you equity, not just cash flow. Tax efficiency. Use tax-advantaged accounts to let your investments snowball uninterrupted. The lesson is simple but life-altering. The earlier you start, the smaller the effort needed and the greater the results. Time is free, but it is the most valuable resource in wealth building, a resource schools rarely mention. So while millions of people focus on chasing salaries, promotions, or instant gratification, the financially educated quietly allow money to grow itself year after year, compounding silently into freedom, security, and true wealth. By now you may realize something critical. All the money lessons schools skipped, from inflation, banks, debt, ownership, credit scores, taxes, psychology to compounding, form a system. Master the system and money becomes a servant. Ignore it and money remains a constant source of stress. Unlocking the money code schools never teach. Now that we've journeyed through the hidden truths of money, it's clear why schools leave out these lessons. From understanding how banks really use your deposits, to harnessing debt as a tool, mastering ownership and investing, navigating tax systems, building a strong credit score, and finally letting time and compounding work for you, the financial world is much more complex than any classroom ever explained. But here's the empowering truth. None of this is reserved for the wealthy. These strategies aren't secret formulas locked away in vaults. They are principles that anyone, anywhere, whether in the USA, Canada, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, or Ghana, can learn and apply. Knowledge is the ultimate wealth multiplier. Once you understand how money really works, you stop being controlled by it and start controlling it. If there's one takeaway from today's video, let it be this. Money doesn't have to be a mystery or a burden. When you educate yourself, plan wisely, and act strategically, money becomes a tool for freedom, opportunity, and security. If you found this video eye-opening and want more insider knowledge about money, the economy, and the hidden facts schools never teach, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and join our community at MindSpark Facts. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. Tell us which money facts surprised you the most or if you've ever applied one of these strategies in real life. Your story might just inspire someone else to take control of their financial future. Remember, knowledge compounds just like money. The more you learn, the more you grow. And on MindSpark Facts, we bring you the insights that schools skipped so you can make smarter choices and achieve financial freedom. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and let your money work for you, not the other way around.